So 3 Podcast, I am Robert.
Yes, and I am Reggie.
And he is, go ahead.
Matt Rederer.
Normally I say your name, but yeah. Okay. Welcome back, Matt.
Yes.
This will be our 4th episode with Matt. Thank you again, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Is it the 4th? It might be the 6th.
No, I think it's
6P?
Oh yeah, I think you're right.
I think we do
Success is actually what it was. Success.
Oh, yes.
This is a throwback to the old Chicago
Spell it.
days. Will you play the Chicago Bulls intro song?
Oh.
Yes, that's it. Please do that.
That'd be great. All right.
And he is
Matt Rederer.
well, he comes from Chicago, so there's a reason we're referencing this. Are you a Chicago Bulls fan?
I was when I was a kid. Yeah.
Yeah, not
Nowadays,
anymore.
They're not winning. So
I hear you. It's kind of like WWF.
Yeah.
As soon as they switch to WWE, it's like
I'm still a
what are we doing?
WWE fan.
You're also still a nerd, and that's sad. Next thing I know, you're gonna say you like anime.
Who doesn't like anime, by the way?
Moving on. So Matt's here today. I'm trying to save you here.
Please, if
Reggie.
you like anime, please give a shout out.
Yeah. He's going to cut this part, by the way. But we're talking about trade-offs, right?
Yes.
With scanning. Because everything we do, there's a trade-off.
Yeah.
And so if you would kind of just dive into that.
Yeah. So, anytime that we're trying to do an image or trying to get pictures of our patient, we're doing a balancing act, right? I mean, everything we do from the parameter standpoint, we're either changing our resolution, our signal,
Right.
our contrast to noise ratio, our image contrast itself. And so we do a lot of changes on our parameters, but it's important to understand what we're actually doing. Because if we don't know what we're doing, we're just button pushers.
Right.
So we need to do more than just push buttons.
As you're pushing a button right now to use the mouse.
Exactly.
Well,
the irony.
Trade-offs always remind me of one of Newton's laws. It's like,
Oh, he's trying to sound smart.
you know what I'm saying? And now I've completely forgot for every action, there's a,
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. God dang it. Cut. Can we start over? Yes. There's a counter reaction of. Yes. It doesn't have to be equal in this sense, but there is an opposite or some sort of, counter.
Moving on.
Negative,
So scanning goals.
Yeah.
So resolution, it's important to understand what each one is, right? Resolution is the detail we see in our image.
Right.
So the ability to see small structures in our image. Then we have signal to noise ratio, which is the ratio between signal to noise. And we always have some level of noise in our image. There's always going to be some baseline noise. And we always want to just get more signal from our patient to offset that noise. So we have a ratio between signal to noise.
For sure.
Contrast and noise is something that we don't really, a lot of people don't understand completely.
Right.
It's the ability to see adjacent structure as well of similar tissues.
So it has nothing to do with gadolinium per se.
It's got nothing to do with gadolinium, even though gadolinium does affect our contrast to noise ratio.
Right.
But really, at the end of the day, I look at it as simplifying in one word. How blurry is our image? We can have a blurry image that has plenty of signal in it. So, but we can't see the contrast very well.
Right.
So there's certain parameters that will blur our image, and we'll talk about those as well.
Awesome.
And then image contrast is another big one. The ability to show tissue in specific ways, and then scan time. I think that's one of our all-time favorites, is going as fast as we possibly can.
Nice.
And right, I mean,
Well,
Right. That's the
it
goal.
benefits, right? I mean, the patient wants you to get it done as quickly as possible.
Right.
Your employer wants you to get it done as quickly as possible.
You got a patient waiting, or you got lunch, right? And you got to go home for the day.
Every patient has a threshold.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely, and that's what I train people when I get these new techs. I was like, hey man, you got to keep it moving.
Right. Don't leave that pause up for too long.
Yeah, exactly. Don't let the scanner outrun you. I always say that. Don't let the scanner outrun you.
I like
Yeah.
that.
You outrun
I'm
the
gonna use
scanner.
that.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that.
So, but you were absolutely right. We want to reduce the round of repeats. We want to make sure patients are comfortable. We want to make sure
Right.
that patients can get through the exam, right? Reducing artifacts, whatever that motion artifact is. But you're absolutely right.
That takes proactive thinking, right?
It does, yeah. And making sure that when we're making our changes to try to go faster or get better resolution, that we're actually doing that for our patient and not just...
Are there like keywords when you're screening a patient that kind of you already know there's going to be a mover? Like I got a code M Getting ready to put on the scanner, right?
Yeah.
What does the M stand for?
Moving? I don't know. Going off the top here.
I would do a lot of like profiling patients. That was a big thing that we did at my site, where we had low patient satisfaction scores. And I don't know if you guys, your site, patient satisfaction is,
I think every
is
place.
huge. I think every place is huge.
For sure.
So I wasn't a big fan of our current process. So we did research on ours, and we would actually try to identify patients in specific ways where we can look and say, hey, this is a high need patient. They might be moving. They might need a little bit more, maybe that warm blanket or something to keep them comfortable, that extra pad, maybe a little more talking to them to get them through the exam, or an independent patient.
Was it like 90s country instead of today's country?
Yes, exactly like that. No, not that much.
Talk about needy, huh?
Jeez.
We all know those people.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. So like what? So then how do you
So we would treat
plan
them
accordingly?
So we would take all the results that we had gotten from their surveys, and then we would also we had in the process of this whole entire thing, we would have listed each patient on a piece of paper and what those profiles were. So we took all that data and said, okay, well, in these independent patients, privacy is huge to them. So privacy was a big deal to them. Where high needs patients, they wanted you to talk to them.
Right.
We would also separate them into introvert versus extrovert.
Right.
So do people even want you to talk to them? I mean, like an introvert, just like, just get me in, get me out. It was all about efficiency. Where the extrovert, tell me about the weather. Tell me about that sports game last night. Talk to me.
Ease my consciousness about this whole process.
So like I actually ask every patient, do you think you're going to sleep during this exam? Not every patient, but especially the ones early in the morning.
Yeah.
If you think you're going to sleep, we'll probably just keep it running. And I can check in with you periodically. But do you think you'll be awake? Do you want me to check in with you more often?
Do you snore?
Absolutely. Just asking. I mean, I think that's the best way. Communication is our best tool, right? To speed things up.
That's one thing that gets
Talk
overlooked.
to our patient, yeah. And don't. And it's perfect. Just be upfront with that. You know, just say, do you feel like you can hold still? Are you claustrophobic in there? Do you normally feel claustrophobic in tight
What do you
spaces?
call the ball?
We're not supposed to call it panic ball, but I call it a call
I never
button.
like that.
We call it a call button.
Yeah.
See, but there's problems with, okay, so I've always called it the get me out of here ball, but I've just been told the past couple of weeks I'm not allowed to use that term anymore.
Okay.
So I'm trying to come up with a new one, but I've always disliked panic ball because I think that can kind of psychologically induce panic.
Yeah.
Like, why would I panic? Like, well, now you're like introducing the thought like that can maybe you would even consider that before.
I've never really put too much thought into it, but you're absolutely right. There's probably got to be a good name that you can name it.
Yeah, but call ball. So like, but then they're gonna squeeze the ball if they don't like the volume on the music, and it's like, what if I was 5 minutes into a 6-minute scan?
Yeah, and I'm stopping it because you have or I hate the ones where it's like where they'll squeeze and be like, I can't. The music's before you start scanning, the music's too loud, and then they start scanning. The machine, can you turn the machine down? It's too loud.
Almost every time.
Can't. Or 20 minutes into a 30-minute scan, they go, I have my wedding ring on. Yeah, no, I saw that.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. You're going to be fine. Wait, your finger's still attached? Wait a second.
Oh, crap, we're almost at minute 21. Thank God he said something. All right, I was just curious. But but it sounds like there's like varying needs for different patients. But like,
absolutely.
But that could change from day to day. They might be a category 1 as far as needy goes, but one day and then a 3 the next.
It could be depending on the day. So but not to get too far off topic, but
do you notice like the people who consistently come back kind of gets easier and easier for them?
Yeah, I think so. I would say as long, because I think not knowing is the thing that keeps people out. But also knowing can scare people too, knowing that they were in there and they had one bad experience and now they're terrified.
I've said this more than once. It's interesting to me that a person will get into a metal box, which is their car, to drive to an MRI facility, then get into a metal elevator, go downstairs, only to tell the MRI tech that they're too claustrophobic for their exam. And it's like, well, what was it about those first 2 things that you're okay with? Well, I think they've done those 2 things before, so they're familiar with it.
Sense of control.
They know what to expect.
Control, I think, is the big one.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say.
And so I tell patients that ball, so with this ball, you have control.
Your control
that is
ball.
one thing I say.
Yeah, I like that.
Control ball?
Control, I think too.
This is your control ball.
Links in
I
it.
like that.
We'll do a survey. I want to see what everybody else
what
calls
do you call the ball?
Right.
Write it down in the
I like that.
comments. I'm curious because
I think we just solved something here.
I know, right? one of the vendors are going to trademark it.
Yeah, I know. It's like, wait a second, we like that. So, but one of the things we could do to go fast, right, is the pulse sequence we choose, right? We can choose so many different types of pulse sequences out there. Fast spin echoes, they're going to be our slow alternative, but they get the best quality image that we like. We can go and do something like a gradient echo where we can get the speed, but compromise a little bit of that image quality.
Right.
But we have choices and to go faster.
Nice.
But there's some parameters that are really big, like TR. So here I've got just a silly video of a TR of someone running. So excitation is when we actually start the process of measuring something.
Nice.
And then after every iteration, we're starting this process over again. But in that period of time, we're doing something. If we increase our TR, what's actually happening is we're increasing the duration of time that we're collecting data, that we're doing whatever we need to do.
They got to run a longer distance.
They got to run a longer distance, so it takes a longer period of time.
Come on, man, you're almost there.
You can do it.
Hey.
Yeah, it took him a while to get there, but he did.
Up. Come on, man.
But as we decrease our TR, we decrease our scan time. But TR is a primary controlling for T1 contrast. So anytime you're doing a T1 weighted image, TR is going to control that level of contrast.
Nice.
It's super important. We'll kind of talk about it a little bit more. All right. But shorter TRs will give us the T1. If we go higher in our TR, we're going to lose that.
Right.
And I'm curious because everybody has their own kind of like, and you think it'd be more like standardized, but like what is your limit on a 1.5 versus a 3T for a T1?
Because that's the
TR range.
T1 range is really the biggest different factor when it comes to 3T versus 1.5, right?
Yeah, I always like doing the two concatenations if I can, like if it's not going to kill me for a T1 and a 3T. But I usually still keep it between 400 and like 800.
Because I've heard 400 is almost too low.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. But I noticed that, like, and I'll show you guys some pictures of some different TRs across on a 3T, and you could tell me which ones you think are good.
Good enough.
Good or bad.
Nice.
So, but phase encoding is another issue that we look at, and I've got some images here, just kind of changing our phase encoding on our image matrix. We know that phase encoding does control our scan time as well. So if we decrease our phase in our image matrix, we can, make our image look a little bit better.
Sure.
So if we have two images back to back, obviously if we bring down our phase encoding, we're going to get a better scan time, but our image quality is going to suffer slightly.
So phase matrix, phase encoding, synonymous, right?
So phase encoding in the image matrix. So we have a phase and frequency in our image matrix, the rows and columns that make up our pixels, the tiny little squares. So when we're talking about phase encoding, that's what we're talking about, either the lines or the rows in our image.
Right, the amount of data points that we're doing in the phase direction.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct.
And when I see this image, it tells me, like, say, for example, if you had an MS lesion, you'd probably see it better with a phase 320.
Correct.
Any smaller type
any smaller pixel will give you better res.
It almost looks like an MS lesion right there below the pawns.
All right, Dr. Jansen, I see you.
Thank you.
They also call him Dancing Jansen, so I almost messed up with that.
I remembered it.
Yes. Dude got moves.
True. Tootsie Roll, baby.
What do you guys do when you, like, let's say, what is your big thing? Like, what do you guys do to lower your scan times?
Different things. Depends on, first thing I look for is the need for oversampling.
Right. Okay.
So if it's built with 100% and, it's A to P on a knee, you can probably reduce some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But what happens to your signal to noise if you do that?
It goes down.
Absolutely.
So I factor that in as well, and I find kind of a happy medium. But that's probably the first thing I look at.
Yeah.
Right. I know.
TR2.
Yeah, TR.
Exactly. So one thing that people tend to newer technologists tend to kind of jack up, especially when it comes to TR, is optimizing your number of slices with your TR range, right? So sometimes people will not bottom out their TR if they increase slices or whatever on GE because it doesn't not necessarily do it automatically for you on some of the older softwares. And that will drastically change your times because sometimes if you add a couple of slices, it will double your time if you do not change the cants and things like that. Like if you do not change your TR. So you have to look out for that. But parallel imaging. I mean, if you have enough coil to kind of activate that without kind of getting an artifact, that will definitely cut your time in half.
Yeah,
right?
just at least 2 coil elements in the phase encoding direction,
Right.
and you're gold. And you can use that. But then what happens to your signal to noise?
Drops.
Yeah, so we got to do something about that.
Right. Trade-offs. Ah!
Yes, I know those trade-offs. So here's an image here. If we got one without parallel imaging, and then one with parallel imaging, and you can kind of maybe see. I know it's kind of hard on this screen here to see the difference here. But parallel imaging is helpful. I mean, it'll drastically decrease your scan time.
To me, it looks about the exact same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell. I mean, look at the savings on time as well.
Well, with a trained eye, if you look at the bottom, now let me stop.
Do you see any plantar fasciitis?
I am surprised by what the rads can see, though.
Yeah.
And matrix makes a huge difference on that. Like, and you have some certain rads that can just see it'd be a motion image, and they're still like dictating out like it ain't no motion. And I'm just like, wow.
So impressive.
So impressive.
I love sitting with the rads and that's something, I mean, do you guys do that often if you guys have time to sit?
As a protocol tech, we do kind of have time to sit with the rads, and we kind of get to understand what they need and why they need it for certain indications and things like that. And that's invaluable information. And protocol techs where we work at try to kind of share that information through different ways of communicating, whether it's at one of our meetings or through like a blog post and things like that. But it is invaluable to be sitting with them, right? Because if you could think like the rad, you can anticipate their needs when you have to make certain changes, right?
Exactly. It's like, what sequences do I need to make high res, and which ones can I save time on if the patient's moving or
if the patient can't, if they're going to tap out, then you know, okay, this is really important for them. Let me just throw that, let's say for the shoulder, coronal fluid sensitive sequence or something, or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
No, it's definitely helpful. But when it comes to shortening your scan time, a lot of people don't know that you could maybe squeeze a few seconds out of your scan by increasing your receiving bandwidth, because it shortens your sample time and it squeezes everything closer together. So your minimum TR gets better. So I like to sometimes squeeze a little bit more out of my scan by increasing my receiving bandwidth. And it works the best on those gradient sequences. Like if you run like a vibe sequence, and I know, I forget what the GE equivalent of that is.
Right.
But
it's lava.
Is it lava?
I want to say.
If you increase that receiving bandwidth, man, you can drastically drop that TR, and your scan time can drastically reduce.
Well, I'm curious now, because when I ask you the same question, what's the first thing that you adjust when you want to decrease that?
That's a good thing. I look at I try to look at the whole thing. There's not like a
the patient's attitude.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I try to look at everything. Like, is it the TR going to? Can I use my minimum TR is probably where I go first. That's the easiest place to kind of skimp on. But it depends on what sequence I'm running. Like if it's going to be a gradient based sequence, I'm going to my receiving bandwidth. That's like my place I go. I can bump that thing up and take my scan time down.
Now you're inducing noise when you bump it up, right?
Yeah. So you have to compensate in some way.
Right.
But if I had some additional signal to spare, I did something else in the back end, then I'll go ahead and do it. And I hate doing this, but if I need to bring my phase encoding down a little bit to get some signal and then bump up my receiving bandwidth, I can try to do a balancing act there.
For sure.
But receiving bandwidth is huge. So we'll look at an image here.
Ooh.
So this is not the prettiest image in the world, but it's 1 minute and 50 seconds. But if I decrease it, here's a 2-minute sequence, and this one looks a little bit worse to me.
Right, I can see it for sure. You can see the grain just anteriorly a lot more on that first.
Yeah. Plus, it looks better. Like, look at this, Reggie. Like actually on a screen.
Oh yeah,
TV doesn't do it well.
So they'll see it real good when I.
Yeah, I mean, granted, it's only 10 seconds, but again, I squeezed a little bit out of it. Not much, but a little bit.
I think that 10 seconds makes a big difference.
I think so too. I think it does make somewhat of a difference. But echo train length, I think that's one we look at the most. Right? So we can increase the echo train length to decrease that scan time. But what is happening to that image? Right? Why do we not want to do that? So if we look at an image where we have a low echo train length, something like 11, I might have a 2 minute and 30 second sequence, and I can bring this down to 1 minute 40 seconds. But there's a lot of blurring in my image.
And this looks like a T2, right?
It's a T2, yeah.
Right.
So is it worth the blurring? I mean, is our contrast to noise ratio benefiting from this change? I don't know. I mean, I guess it all depends on, the patient's condition. Is this an important sequence for the radiologists?
Right.
Well, what is this exam? Like, are we looking at the hips and you're trying to find the labrum, or is this like pelvis?
It could be, let's, what would you guys say would be an important one that we don't want blurring on?
I would say a hip where you want to see the labrum, but also our high-res prostate. So
right.
Yeah, exactly. But if this was a routine screening pelvis,
Yeah.
I would say
it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to play it by ear, I think.
Right. And every patient's a little bit different. I think that's what makes MRI techs who can manipulate the trade-offs on a superior level kind of stand out. Like the rads really appreciate those guys because they can look at a scenario and still get that best quality.
Exactly.
Because you see the big picture, right? You understand the purpose of this exam.
Right.
Exactly. And we have so many parameters at our disposal. Right. And understanding what each one is important. Like, we don't want to be button pushers. Like, I don't want to be labeled a button pusher. I want to know what I'm doing when I change this button.
You're far from it, bro.
Well, thank you.
Well, the whole field is kind of going in that direction, though, which is kind of the fear, right? Because if we do become button pushers, then that tailored to that patient type of evaluation that we have will definitely decrease. Definitely. I said that on purpose. But simply because there's a huge value in being able to make these changes on the fly to still get the best quality on patients who have a very low threshold on how long they can be in there. Mm-hmm. It's just invaluable to the radiologist.
I agree. I completely agree with you. You know, we have so many parameters, like half Fourier, which we talked about. So half Fourier is going to be this one where we can fill a part of our case space and then fill the rest with zeros. All right, so we can shorten our scan time. We use that a lot. And so here's a bad image, but it's got no half Fourier on it. And then here, if we use it, we saved 30 seconds on it. But I mean, I think that this is a lot worse of an image. Some situations maybe you could get away with it, but other situations, maybe not. But it's good to see comparison between the two sets of images, see if it's worth that time savings.
I noticed looks like, no SAB bend. Really, it might be superior or inferior, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So just to kind of get an idea of what it looks at. And then you're familiar with like phase field of view, rectangular field of view?
Yes.
Yeah. So I use that a lot, especially on long bones and stuff like that.
Yes.
So you can increase the phase field of view and not have to adjust the resolution,
right? And I know
maintain the same matrix, right?
Yeah,
it was mostly kind of an isolation to maybe Siemens for sure, and maybe Philips. I'm not 100% sure with Philips, but now I know GE with their newer software past 26. You can actually manipulate the phase field of view as well now on a percentage level, which is nice. So
that is nice. Yeah. And I know that GE years and years ago, it's been a long time since I worked on a GE, but they wouldn't let you go above 100%.
Right.
They limited it at that. But then now that they opened it up where you can go above it,
right.
Man, it's changed everything.
Game changer, right.
It was a game changer because now you could do those long bones and get them really nice and without altering your image matrix. You can still get that really good.
Well, and I know in the textbooks, they talked about rectangular pixels, right? So is that still a problem?
That's still a problem, and I've actually got an image to show you the difference between it, because when we go and what they call it anisotropic pixels, these rectangular pixels, they will impact our contrast to noise ratio when we get there. But rectangular field of view is kind of neat. I mean, we can shorten our scan time if we use it and still have some pretty good quality images. As long as we have the signal to noise ratio high enough to compensate for that change. So rectangular field of view is a great tool to use to shorten that scan time. All right, so let's talk a little bit about contrast to noise. So we don't really know too much about this one, and I think one of the parameters that we kind of hear a lot about, but receiving bandwidth, like what is it? Like what is receiving bandwidth?
Right.
We know that we increase it if we want to decrease metal artifact or susceptibilities. We know that we decrease it to get signal in our image, but really what is it? Like what is it really doing for our image?
Right.
So receiving bandwidth is, to me, I use the analogy like a photocopy, making a photocopy of the anatomy itself. So I have options. I can take this anatomy, put it in a copy machine, and I can go ahead and use a short or a high receiving bandwidth or a low receiving bandwidth. If I use a low receiving bandwidth, my image is going to be a low quality copy of the actual. It's like kind of putting a sheet of paper in a copy machine and making it a low quality copy.
Right, the DPI, right?
Yeah, it's a low quality image that comes out and it looks horrible.
Right.
But if you go ahead and you increase that receiving bandwidth, what you're doing is you're shortening your sample time, which you're getting a better look at that patient frequency. You're making a better copy of that patient frequency. So your image is going to look so much sharper. And so here's an image here of two images here. It's hard to see it on this screen here, but we have one at 200, one at 400, and you can see more of the detail in the bone.
How does it affect susceptibility?
from susceptibility. So if you increase your receiving bandwidth, you're going to decrease the susceptibility artifacts in your image.
And so that's one of the reasons why you would increase it for like a metal protocol.
Correct. But I'd like to increase it if I have enough signal in all sequences, because I'm making a better quality of the patient signal. Remember, our patient's constantly producing signal.
Right.
And our job is to catch that signal at the time we want to demonstrate some type of contrast in our image.
Right.
And so that's our job, but we have to replicate it as best as we possibly can.
For
And
sure.
using that high receiving bandwidth is going to do that. It's going to give us the high
sure.
quality.
And people kind of sleep on this, but if they go too low, you kind of start getting like this little in and out of phase issue, like that
Chemical
shift artifact.
You bet.
Right?
Chemical shift. I actually got an image of chemical shift.
Nice. Dang, you thought of everything.
I did. I tried. So we know averages or next. GE calls them next.
Right.
But do you guys know what that is? Do you know what that parameter is and what it's actually doing?
Yeah, so we're pretty much sampling the data point over again, right?
Correct.
So we're going. So if you have one average, you're just going through that whole set of data once. If you have two averages, you're going through it twice, right?
Correct.
So if you've got like 4 averages on a T1, that's one thing you can maybe decrease. The decrease time is like do a 3 averages instead of 4.
Yeah, you can bring it down. I had a tech once tell me they were sitting on a scan. They're like, I'm going to get this to be the best resolution possible. And they cranked up their averages next to 10. And they're like, see, look at this. I brought it from 4 to 10. This is going to look fantastic. And it looked all blurry because they averaged too much of the image itself. Because there's a point where you can start averaging too much.
Right.
So
plus, if they just move once in that 20-minute sequence.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like 20 minutes. Not worth it. But if we run 2 sequences, one with 1 average, one with 2 averages, you can see that there's noise.
Oh yeah.
On the top here, and it's less noise on it. So I don't know.
Are these images that you did?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, those are images that I did.
And what did you do it on?
I did it on a Vario.
Nice. So that is a Siemens 3T?
3T, yep.
Yeah.
That's actually was my first car.
Dang.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good scanner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you fall in love?
What was your first car?
My first car, well, if we're talking Siemens, it was an Esprit.
No, just overall.
Well, I learned on a GE first. So it was a
Okay.
GE 16X, I want to say, Signia. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a
You like-
million
We're
of
going
those
around
out
the
there.
room, Katie. What was your Phillips?
Phillips. Oh, wow.
What,
Nice.
Phillips what? What was yours?
Ingenio?
It was a GE, and I forget the model of it. It was like 20 years ago. So
Twin turbos? Horse and wagon? No, I was joking.
yeah, exactly. It feels like it.
I know, right? There's so many GE scanners out there. They really help push the field forward, especially during the beginning days, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with DL.
Software was like 2 back then.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. There was a.
What are we at now? 29?
Yeah, 30 just released with the new version of the DL that just came out. So where you can get, and actually I'll put a link in the description so we can actually go into more detail if you want to see that. Just watch that for sure.
Cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
They're doing like the deep learning is amazing.
Oh my gosh, game changer for the field. It kind of turns this whole parameter trade-off
Yeah.
paradigm on top of its head, right?
It does.
It does allow for the opportunity for like button pushers to thrive.
It does. And
So-
it really does. And it's a little scary, but
Yeah.
still at the end of the day, we still have control of our resolution.
Right.
We still have to peak that
Still
resolution.
got to play the game.
And we still have to play the game, and our contrast to noise ratio still will be somewhat effective.
Right.
Right.
How I kind of imagine it is like you're still playing the game of basketball. You're just using like an 8-foot rim now instead of 11-foot rim. So now everybody can make slam dunks. You know? Like,
yeah, exactly. That's pretty good. I like that.
Right.
But when we look at contrast noise, you can't talk about contrast noise without looking at echo train length. So echo train length is a parameter that we use when we are talking about how many echoes we collect in a TR. And so if you look at 2 images here, one's at 25 echo train length and one's at a 12, you could see. I could see a big difference. One's blurry,
Right.
one's not. And so the blurry image to 25 echo train length is going to be a poor contrast to noise ratio.
So as you increase it, it's inversely proportional as far
Correct.
as signal goes.
We'll contrast to noise ratio.
So the blur.
And yeah, we get less noise too as we increase our echo train length. And then obviously contrast media does play a role as well. So
Right.
in our contrast noise,
Right.
we give contrast. We can see things a little bit better in our image. Now, resolution. What are the parameters that you guys alter to get that good resolution?
You want a thin slice, right?
Yeah.
3Ds are big on high res.
Yeah.
Matrix. We got
image matrix. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big one. So slice thickness, matrix,
resolution, which matrix.
Yeah. Is there another one?
There's one more.
There's one more. Slice thickness, matrix, and field of view.
Yes.
Sneaky FOV.
That is, it's sneaky.
Yes, you sneaky FOV.
That's good. But slice thickness is a big one. So what would you have to do with your slice thickness to make it better?
You have to lower it for sure, right?
Yeah.
So you want to shrink that gap in between each slice.
And then, so what's the trade-off for that?
So the trade-off is going to be signal to noise, right? You're gonna if you increase your slice thickness, you decrease your resolution, but your signal to noise increases.
Then your coverage too, right?
Yep.
So you end up having to add slices, which means you need more TR. So it's ended up sometimes end up being time too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you said image matrix.
Right.
Image matrix. What do you do to your image matrix?
Right. So you want to boost it. So, and it's always funny because the textbooks will tell you like, okay, a fine matrix is like greater than 312 by 256, and then a coarse matrix is like 256 by 256, and then or 256 by 192, and then the mid range is like 256 by 256, right? But I guess you would want to definitely increase the amount of data points that you're doing, right? So you want to like go like 512 or just pretty much boost it.
Yeah,
right?
but you know, there's this is the one that always gets taxed. It's not about the number. We're always hung up on this like image matrix that it has to be nothing less than 256 by 256. Nothing less than that. That means nothing to me. Those are just numbers. What means more to me is the ratio between the field of view and my image matrix, because I can have a field of view that's huge and a 512 by 512.
Now, what's a huge field of view?
Maybe let's say I have like 360.
Okay.
360 millimeter field of view, 512 by 512, and you're gonna say, oh my God, that's really good. That's really good.
Right.
Well, if I decrease my field of view to something like maybe 160, and I do 192 by 192, it might be the same size pixel. I have to do the math. I don't have a calculator on it, but it might be very similar in size of pixels. So it's really the ratio between field of view. Our field of view matters. It's not just the image matrix. Right. Image matrix is just a number. It's what the relationship to the field of view is that actually matters.
Right.
So as you increase the field of view, you'd want to, how does that affect with resolution? What would you want to do?
So what happens to your resolution when you increase your field of view?
Goes down.
Goes down. Sure, yeah. So you'd have to increase your image matrix to balance it out.
Yeah. Right.
But think of this, like anytime that I'm trying to optimize an image from a resolution standpoint, what happens when you get a bigger field of view? Let's say I'm scanning ahead and I go from a nice fitting field of view to something bigger. Well, half my pixels are going to be making up air. Right. So I might have a small pixel. That's great. Wonderful. But if half of them are making up air, it means, I'm not getting anything diagnostic on the patient.
Right.
It's better to make a tighter field of view and smaller pixels because I'm having more make up the brain than having this huge.
You look like a 240 to me.
A 240?
Bruh. Dang, a 240? You gonna do it like that?
On a sagittal.
No, I'm just joking.
I'm just joking. How about a 230 with oversampling for the nose?
No, that's hilarious. I know when it comes to the radiologist, there's like looking at MS plaques, or they're looking at the nerve. I'm neuro, so I'm very versed with that. They want to be able to kind of zoom in. Yes. And the more you zoom in with the lower matrix, the blurrier it gets. So they really like to have higher matrices when they're looking at finer structures because they can kind of zoom in and really
so for
dial in their
example,
report.
Like IACs or something?
Yeah. Like IACs.
Trigems.
Seizures. Yeah.
Seizures. Oh, yeah. Seizures a big one. Trigeminal nerve. Yeah. Any of those.
So when you use an image matrix, let's say we use something that's not the same. Like if we go from 256 to 256 by 192, what happens to the image that we actually acquire? And so it actually changes slightly. When we go with an anisotropic pixel, we actually lose a little bit of that contrast to noise ratio. We blur our image a little bit in the process of doing that. Now we ask ourselves, is that worth it? In some situations, maybe it is worth the blur. And it's not substantial, but it's enough.
Right.
to see.
Because it comes down to the structures that we're looking at, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like if you're looking at small structures, you definitely don't want to go too low on your matrix because it's going to blur everything, right?
Yep.
And then intravoxel, I know you probably already have a slide for this. And I call it intravoxel aliasing, but that is wrong. But when two tissue contrasts kind of share the same voxel.
Yes.
And
So
they kind of blur.
Partial volume averaging.
Partial volume
Yes.
averaging.
So we have a lot of tissue in one voxel. Yes.
Right.
Different tissues.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we want to stay away from
Is there
that.
anything you don't know? How many dimples are there on a golf ball?
I have no idea.
336.
Look at that.
You should have made him guess.
Finally, I
You should have
did.
made me guess. So here's a picture of partial volume.
Oh, yeah.
So you got it right here, and then here's one without it. Same
Yeah.
slice, but you can see all this tissue partial volumed in there.
Well, it's not the same slice.
So you see.
It's the same area, yeah.
The
But
same area, yeah.
But look, one's 10 millimeters thick.
Oh, I see.
Man. So like this intravoxel aliasing, which is not the right term. Sorry.
Partial volume averaging.
Partial volume average. But intravoxel aliasing makes perfect sense too, right?
Yeah,
Kinda.
Still recording.
So we can look at image matrix and field of view as also another one as well. So if we look at field of view, obviously if we have two images with different field of views, we have all those pixels making up air. It's not helping us up, and we have very few pixels actually making up the anatomy. So
yeah.
And it's easy for somebody to just simply want to increase the field of view, but there is consequences to that. So people
There
should
is.
be aware of that.
Yeah. Now, signal to noise is like big one, but now it's kind of moot because we're talking about, deep learning and how deep learning can benefit us, in terms of that. But, back in the day, like, what do you guys do today? If you don't have deep learning, what do you guys do to get some signal back in your image without touching your resolution? Because we know that if we decrease our resolution, we get more signal.
Right. Do you have parallel imaging on? Because if you do, sometimes I'll turn that off.
I like that because that's reversing the process. I mean, people don't think about the reversing process, but you're
Right.
absolutely right. That's perfect.
Right.
Oh, you stole my answer. I mean, there's different things you could do for sure.
Bandwidth, right? You can lower your bandwidth.
Bandwidth, yeah.
Yeah,
You could actually add oversampling.
you can. Yeah.
That's a great one.
As long as
Sample
there's
more
tissue
data.
there. Sometimes you
Right.
get, it's like a false, like you think if there's no tissues outside of that and you're just sampling air, it's not signal.
And it will still add to your relative signal to
yeah,
noise.
relative estimated signal.
And
Yeah.
I hate that because it's not true.
Yep,
You're
absolutely.
right. That's a good point.
Yeah. But averaging is something good. I look at it as coats of paint. I was taught this by Bill Faulkner told me this analogy, and I loved it. And it was that averaging is like putting coats of paint on your image. Like if you have a wall that needs to be painted, and it's all just a noisy wall. You could slap a coat of paint on that wall, and you can hide some of that noise over signal.
I love that.
But if you go ahead, you could put another coat on there. And if you put another coat on there, you'll hide it even more. And you can keep putting coats of paint on there to get more signal.
Dude, that is
It's a rap song. I love
great-
Abstract Rude at Coda Paint. Google it.
That is a great analogy too. I love
Isn't
It
it?
actually really is. I like
It really paints the picture.
Oh, I like it.
this guy.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. But if we throw up two images next to each other, you can see that you're going to definitely get better signal, better quality if you have two averages opposed to one.
Nice.
But you also said receiving bandwidth, right? You said lowering your receiving bandwidth is a nice,
Yeah.
easy way to get some signal. And it's important to kind of look at what it does to your image. Now, here's an image where you can see that chemical shift. Remember, we
Can
talked
you
about
window level that for me, please?
I wish, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that would be nice. But chemical shift, you can see that there's this bright area on one side here
Oh,
of the
yeah.
prostate, and there's a dark area, this chemical shift. But if I increase my receiving bandwidth, it kind of goes away. I don't see as bright of an area here or as
Right.
dark of a line there. But we get more of an accurate representation of our tissue. So it's always better to manipulate our image that way.
And I know we're not talking about artifacts, but Indian ink artifacts, or I don't know, fine line, I think sometimes it's called.
Isn't it? I'm herringbone too, isn't it?
Herringbone, that's the other way.
Yeah.
And that's really when it the dark lines are really just popping out, right?
Yeah, it's a corrupted pixel inside the key space.
space.
Yeah, so then it generates this inaccuracy across your entire image.
Right.
So
Nice. So that doesn't mean you have a high resolution image, by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
No.
Just to be clear.
But what's like important to you guys? Like a lot of times we think like Image contrast, right? We got
Right.
T1, we got T2, we've got diffusion imaging, we got flow imaging, we got PD imaging.
Right.
There's different things that we can do to represent our image. Each one holds a different power in itself, but it's our job to make sure that we represent that contrast. And I always like to plug the word contrast because it sometimes gets confusing and replace it with differences. Right? We want to see differences between tissues.
Right.
We
So
want to
that's
see.
when like echo train link plays a big part.
Yeah, it could play a part in that with our different anything
Phase
that
encoding, maybe.
yeah, phase encoding, anything with our contrast to noise ratio, I think it's kind of where you're leading with it. But when you look at your image contrast, we want to make sure we can see as many differences as possible between our we want to see as many differences between different tissues in the right fashion. Longitudinal magnetization, transverse magnetization.
Right. Because there's a reason why we have these different image contrasts, right?
Yeah.
And we build protocols depending on indication based off of how these image contrasts provide information.
Yes, absolutely. And if we have T1, what is T1? What does fluid look like on a T1?
It's going to be dark.
Yeah.
If you do it right, it's going to be real dark.
Exactly. It should be dark and fat. What color is fat?
Fat's going to usually be still bright.
Yeah, it's going to be bright. So we want to make sure we see that type of contrast in our image, because then anything that's fluid is going to be dark, and anything that's fat is going to be bright. And we can use that as our go-to when we look at our anatomy on our image.
For sure.
Now, if we go too low, there's a sweet spot, right? When we talked about sweet spots of TR, and we said TR controls T1 contrast. If we go too low, I'm not going to have enough signal to represent the image.
Exactly.
All right, it's going to be really not so good. But if I go too high, my image is all signal. I have all this recovery of longitudinal magnetization, and it's just a bright image. Look at that fluid. It's not really even that dark.
Right.
But if we find that sweet spot, this is a 600, we can still see a really nice contrast. Gray matter, white matter, fluid in the ventricles.
And sometimes, and there is usually like a gateway or a threshold with that sweet spot. But each scanner I've noticed has their own little sweet spot, whether 600 or 650 type of thing. You know?
Yeah.
So you do really have to cater to each one of your cars, I like to say, your automobiles when it comes to finding that sweet spot.
It is. And I like just to kind of like, to your point, which is perfect, is find that range. And within that range, just play. Take an image at each point. Take one at, if you say 400, 800, okay, take one at 400. Take one at 500, 600, 700, 800. Which one looked the best?
Right.
And that's going to be that sweet spot for that scanner, that patient.
Awesome. And I don't know to speak to this, and maybe you can, but sometimes when you pull out of the Siemens tree or the GE tree, ideally I want to say, hey, this is the sweet spot for this scanner, but that's not necessarily true. At least,
it might not be.
Right.
And it's always good to play because your room can play a role in it. The homogeny of that field can play a role in it.
Actually,
So
yeah.
just playing, especially with inverse recovery sequences, those sequences, you want to make sure that or fat sats, when we start working with some of those sequences.
Right. Nice.
Yeah, and then we have T2. And now what happens, TE controls T2 contrast. Do you alter your TE a lot?
No, it's pretty set.
It's pretty set?
Right.
Now, what does TE do to your image? Like if you were to use a low TE versus a high TE?
So the higher your TE, the more signal you're definitely going to lose.
Affects the contrast.
How so?
Less contrast will be seen. I'm reading your.
It's pretty much letting you know how much,
the answer, Matt.
how much transverse magnetization you're going to actually listen for, right? So if you really want your fluids to be bright, you're going to want a higher TE because you're going to be able to get more
T2 contrast.
T2 contrast.
Yeah. So let's look at some images here. So we do a low TE. This is 10. Everything's kind of bright. And yes, we do see some contrast in there, T2 contrast. It's nice, smooth, more of a gray scale to it. And then we go to something like 900, which, so we get more contrast, T2 contrast to it. Then if we go to something like, this is supposed to be 180, sorry. 180, you could see just a high difference between that contrast. Now, for me, I change my TE depending on what I'm looking at. Like if I'm looking at a lot of cysts, well, that's kind of defined. I want fluid to be bright in contrast to everything else.
Right.
Just like we do for MRCPs. We use a high TE so we can make the common bile duct pop out through all the other tissue that we suppressed, essentially allowing them to decay.
Right.
But if I'm looking at a small lesion that's maybe got some low density to it, I'm going to want to use a lower TE so I can really catch all the borders of that and really get a good look at that lesion if it doesn't have these high differences between signal intensity. So I like to change my TE depending on what I'm kind of looking at. But again, if your radiologists govern all of this. If your radiologist doesn't want you to do it, anything that we talked about today in terms of changing anything is dictated by the radiologist.
We have one rat in particular that when we do a T2, he wants to make sure that it's above 90. Like an 80 is just not good enough when it comes to TE.
Sure.
He wants it to be above. It has to be at least above 90. And he actually retired last week.
Cranstar.
Yeah. So big shout out. Great educator. A big loss to us. So Dr. Cranstar, if you're watching this, man, appreciate you. Maybe we'll get you on the podcast if you're willing.
Ooh,
and retired. Yeah, but great rad.
Very cool. So PDs, what do you guys know about PDs? Do you guys do a lot of PD sequences?
We did. So we were doing more PDs before, I guess, the stirs were mainstream.
Okay.
But we don't do as much PDs anymore, actually, that I can think of in the brain at least. We do in MSK.
Yes.
We still do a lot of proton
cartilage,
densities. Yeah.
Yeah. So PDs are kind of reserved for that at this point. We used to do a lot in the brain, but then with flare imaging and all that, we don't really do much anymore. But PDs,
flare,
with PD imaging, we just want to get rid of T1 contrast and T2 contrast. That's essentially what a PD is. It's looking at an image that doesn't have the T1, so we have a very high TR.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have T2, so we have a very low TE, and then we get an image that looks like a PD weighted image. One of the special contrasts there. But here's one that I think is it throws you off. This threw me off. This gets me excited because I think a lot of us as techs, we sit there and we want to go as fast as we can a lot of times. And I think one of the sore points, as you said, is what is the first thing that you do to cut your scan time down?
Right.
TR, right?
Oh, yeah.
So when you look at a flare and you see that TR, it's 9,000, but your lowest TR you could go is like 1,000.
Right.
And you're like, oh, man. Like, what if I could just go down it's supposed to be, what if I went down to 4,000? Or what if I went down there? What does that do to my image? It's a huge cut in my scan time, right? If I'm at 9,000, I go to 4,000. Right. Man, that's a huge cut.
Right.
But what is happening to our image?
Right.
And I think that's so important to look at. So let's look at an image here. I took this image on this patient with, it's a flare, 2,500 millisecond TR.
Mm-hmm.
I ran it again with a 9,000, and I would have missed all of that.
Yeah, it really illustrates the point right there.
The point is we can't cut corners. There's a reason why we have set limits for things, and we can't cut those corners. So I had a technologist that was doing that consistently because they were just like trying to rush through these exams as fast as possible. But how many lesions did that technologist miss just because he was cutting corners?
Right.
So we have to be very careful that we're not that technologist.
Right.
We're doing what's best for the patient.
If you don't know why you're changing, like if you don't have a reason or, I don't know, if you don't know what the trade-off is, then I always suggest to just not touch it, honestly.
Absolutely.
That's what I tell everyone. Because then when the rat asks, hey, so why'd you do this? You have kind of an answer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Versus just being like, I just wanted to lower scan time.
Yeah.
It's faster.
It's faster. Yeah. It was my turn to go on break.
Right. It's my turn to go.
So, but we also could look at diffusion-weighted imaging. And what is the parameter that controls diffusion-weighted imaging? Like, it's unique to diffusion-weighted imaging.
I would say then B-value for sure, right?
Yeah, it's B-value.
Right.
Absolutely. So B-value is going to be...
Brownian motion.
The Brownian motion, the thermal movement of water, yes.
My single nerd moment for this episode.
There's been more than one.
But if we look at an image, like we know that a B-value of 0 is not going to really see that diffusion. The higher we go on the B-value, the more diffusion we see.
Right.
But the trade-off is, the thing would be, well, man, if I could go as high as I want on that B-value, why don't I do that?
Right.
But the problem is if I go too high, I'm also introducing more noise into my image.
Right.
So I have to find this balancing act between getting this diffusion in my image versus...
Right. Can we talk... So how does calculated B-values really play a role? Because I'm kind of interested in that. Cause
ADC or?
Yeah, so they do this whole, they do the 1600 for the prostates. And I'm like, okay, if we can just calculate B-values, then why can't we just calculate, we do, of course we need maybe one or two, but then we can just have a bunch where we're just calculating 800, 1200, and then 1600, right?
Yeah, because it's based on, from what I was told by a radiologist, they didn't like it because they said it wasn't real and it was kind of based off guesswork. And I don't know if that's true or not, so I don't want to be quoted on that.
Right.
But they didn't like it. I had the same idea. I thought that was going to be a good idea. Why don't you, if it's such a bad quality image at 2,000 to B-value, which is where they want it, why can't we do it at 1,000, calculate it for 2,000? Because then we can balance it. And then we did that a few times, and it looked okay to me, but I don't know if they didn't really care for it.
What the value is.
Yeah.
The rad side, right?
From the rad side, yeah.
Cool.
So, but that's neat. That's an option with a B value as well.
I see a little eddy currents in the image on that, right?
Oh, yeah, a little bit of, looks like an eddy current.
Nerd moment number 3.
God dang it. God dang it. We're gonna track that for the record.
But what parameters are unique to phase contrast?
Ooh.
What? Say that again?
Phase contrast imaging. So, like, let's say you do cardiac. Yeah, cardiac. What is the unique value to those phase contrast image?
So we're talking about VANC, I guess, right? So
VANC would be that.
Usually it's around 200, and then you would deviate based on aliasing.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And if it's too, let's say you see aliasing, what do you do?
Usually increase it by about 30%. Is that what it is?
Something like that. Yeah. I usually just feel it out. You get to a certain point where you can feel it out a little
Robert's
bit.
being really modest right now. He technically writes textbooks on cardiac MR. So.
Really?
Go to the website.
Nice. Very cool. But yeah, so VANC, depending on what your VANC is, you'd adjust accordingly. So that would have aliasing in the first one over there, so you'd have to adjust accordingly.
And I know, and I don't usually do it as often as other techs do, but there's a way that you can actually go into their echo lab report or echo results and find that VANC from there.
Oh yes. Okay, yes. Yeah, the velocity of the flow, right? What is it? I can't remember right now.
Not injection fraction, but...
Is it centimeters per second?
Because you do have to do a conversion, right? Is there a slight conversion with it?
So if I'm being honest, I never do it because honestly, if I just have to run another one and bump it up 30% or whatever it may be at the time, it's just another 10-second breath hold. Yeah. So I'm like, and it would have taken me 4 minutes to look up that echo.
And you have to wait anyway. You have a delayed imaging, so you have delayed imaging. So you have this whole period of time you're waiting, like 10 to 12 minutes.
Right.
So you might as well rerun whatever you need, during that period of time. So,
and does the heart...
That's what I do my 4-chamber, by the way. But.
Oh, really? Nice.
The VANC is affected by the heart rate, right?
It's I
think about the turbulent flow.
Yeah, it's flow.
Okay.
So, and different flows are going to have different VANCs. So, like if I'm doing cerebrospinal fluid flow study, I'm going to use a very low VANC. So my VANC is going to be sensitive to a lower velocity of tissue.
And so that's another time you would do it, right? On CSF flow.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you can still see those same artifacts.
Right.
All right.
So you don't want to see that white chopped out area, right? That's the aliasing.
That's the aliasing.
Which some people I feel like get confused by that.
Yes.
And it'll kind of look like a TV with poor signal back in the day, right? Yeah. Like it'll be right over the area of interest. So if it's outside of the whatever it is, if you're looking at the aorta, like the ascending aorta, but it might be outside of that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why they call it aliasing?
It's because your signal's wrapping on itself.
Nice.
So the system gets confused because the velocity is above what you're sensitive to. So it thinks that it's the opposite flow. So.
Right. And I think of it, and this is weird for me, but I think of it in the aspects of K-space versus image space in this aspect, where you have, and if you have that chart system where it looks like a T, right? And you have your positive up here, your negative down here, it's saying that it's this point down here when it's really that point up here, type of thing.
Kind of.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
No, but you're right. If you look, I look at it from there's that circular of signal where it's darker and then it gets brighter, where you're sensitive to it, then it kind of flips the signal.
Right.
So it confuses the signal that way.
Nice.
I don't.
Is there anything you don't know?
I don't know a lot of things.
You didn't know how many
I didn't know how.
You didn't know how many nipples were on a golf ball.
I didn't know that.
What are the only 2 baseball teams that don't end with an S?
I have no idea.
I'll give you a hint. You should know one. And if you think of that one, then you'll think of the other.
This is going to be on the CE quiz, so pay attention.
And the other one, no, I don't know. You got me.
You got it.
Did I get it? What's the other one?
White Sox and Red Sox.
Oh yeah, okay.
Dang.
And so
interesting.
That's just what I bring to the table.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Do you spell Reggie with 2 G's or 1?
2, right?
My guy.
Yeah.
I know how to make multiple course.
Trying to make an OG joke there, but
well, I mean, I think that's everything. Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. I think that's everything.
Valuable information. You're awesome, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions, you can always go to his website. What is your website?
www.riteadvantage.com.
And you're always available to answer those questions.
Always available.
So a lot of these animations that we're seeing, you actually have on your website and everything too, right?
Correct.
Explain these concepts, which I think visual aids are so valuable when understanding these complex, like, topics, really, honestly. So we do appreciate it.
So you offer like training courses on your website?
Correct. Yes.
Right.
With optimization or cardiac or MRSO or MRI training as well.
Yeah. Right. Very cool. You're awesome. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Zone 3 Podcast. Thank you for watching. Thank you subscribing. Reggie?
I appreciate everybody out there. Katie?
Nothing. Great. Thank you.
We have that on a loop for every episode.
Say we're out, Reggie. Say it.
Zone 3 Podcast, we are out. Good.